Good evening. I'd like to call the Vacaville Planning Commission meeting of July 2022 to order. Can we please have the roll call?
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. Chair Klein.
Here.
Vice Chair Fortney.
Here.
Commissioner Vargas.
Here.
Commissioner Lightfoot.
Here.
Commissioner Levant.
Here.
Commissioner Rudin. Here. Commissioner Wilkerson.
Here.
Chair, we have a quorum.
Excellent. We're all in the house for the first time, I think, this term, so it's good. Yeah, excellent. See everyone. We will now have the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Vice Chair Fortney.
Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Vice Chair Fortney.
Thank you.
This is a portion of our meeting where we receive and introduce written correspondence. Madam Clerk, do we have any communications?
We do not.
Thank you. We'll now move to item 4, approval of agenda. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Vice Chair Fortney. Do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Levante. This is the first time we've sat together, so anyway, please call the vote.
Commissioner Vargas. Yes. Commissioner Lightfoot.
Yes.
Commissioner Levante.
Yes.
Commissioner Rudin.
Yes.
Commissioner Wilkerson.
Yes.
Vice Chair Fortney.
Yes.
Chair Klein.
Yes. We will now entertain business from the floor. This is the time to address the commission with issues that are not on the agenda, that are within the commission's subject matter jurisdiction. Seeing nobody at the podium, I will now close business from the floor. We will now move to the consent calendar. The item we have here is approval of minutes from the June, our last meeting of June 21st, 2022. I will abstain from voting on that, along with, I would encourage anyone who could not make that meeting to also abstain. With that, do we have a motion, or is there anything to add to the consent calendar first? We're supposed to ask that question? No, we don't ask that. Of course not. So, do we have a motion for approval of the consent calendar?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Please call the roll.
Who second?
Vargas.
Commissioner Vargas.
Yes.
Commissioner Lightfoot. Commissioner Levante.
Yes.
Commissioner Rudin.
Yes.
Commissioner Wilkerson.
Yes.
Vice Chair Fortney.
Yes.
Chair Klein.
Abstain. We will now move to item 7, public hearing. This item A, North Village Area Plan 2, we've got a request from the developer to continue it to the August 16th Planning Commission meeting. And
It would be appropriate to see if we can get a motion, a second, and a vote to continue it to August 16th. That's staff's recommendation.
okay. Is it proper to vote on this motion if you have a conflict of interest? No? Okay. Excellent. Do we have a motion to move this item to item A, North Village Area Plan 2, to the August 16, 2022 meeting?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Can we please call the roll?
Commissioner Vargas.
Yes.
Commissioner Lightfoot.
Yes.
Commissioner Levante.
Yes.
Commissioner Rudine,
Yes.
Commissioner Wilkerson,
Yes.
Vice Chair Fortney,
Yes.
Chair Klein.
I'm abstaining. Okay, so we will now close public hearing and move to business. Item A. Our first item of business is the Green Tree Study Session. Staff contact here is Payman, Yvonne, Aaron, or excuse me, Ms. Morris?
I'll respond to either. Thank you, Chair Klein. This evening, we have our consultant planner, Kathy Pease, filling in for Payman. So she's going to make some introductory comments, and then the developer is going to give the presentation.
Excellent. Welcome, Kathy.
Can you hear me? I'm Kathy Pease, and the item before you tonight is an informational item only. We're not asking for any recommendations or actions on this item. It's purely informational. There's a lot of information that's covered in this entitlement, and we thought that it would be great for the applicant to give you an overview. I did want to point out there's an error in the staff report. I believe it said August 23rd, but we actually would be bringing back the entitlements to you on August 16th. So I wanted to point that out. It'll be at a regular Planning Commission meeting. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to the applicant.
Screen.
Good evening, Commissioners, members of the Vacaville community. I'm Richard Loki, Loki Planning Associates. We're here on behalf of the Green Tree Development Group. And the last time we were here with you was back on the 17th of May. And at that time, we were focused strictly on the draft environmental impact report, taking questions and comments from you and from the public. Since then, we know that work has moved along in completing what's called the final EIR. I'll talk about that process a little bit in a moment. The purpose of our being here and the short presentation I'm going to make to you this evening is to update you on a number of technical issues that we have been working on since May, and to try and finally have a chance to put this mixed-use housing project in perspective. This isn't just an ordinary housing project, as you know by now. It's primarily workforce housing, and it's a project that at the same time is mixed use and infill. The complexities of dealing with all the environmental issues, all of the neighborhood and traffic interface issues, and importantly, to structure the housing product types to match demand in the marketplace has been a staggering task. At the same time, it's been gratifying for us to see the progress that Vacaville has made in not only development of, but finding tenants for its major business park on the other side of Interstate 80. So with that, I'm going to walk through a couple slides, and feel free to stop me with questions as we go along. This is not a formal presentation tonight. The intent is to give you some useful, we think, background information, and then to be able to answer your questions. So if that's okay, I'm going to dive into it. First of all, as you know, Green Tree is at the northeast corner of Vacaville, but it's surrounded essentially on two sides by the established Leisure Town neighborhood. It's across the street from additional residential uses, and it directly adjoins the business park across Interstate 80. In terms of actions that have taken place since our last meeting, when we concluded the public comments on the draft EIR, we went back to the Parks and Rec Commission to give them an opportunity to review and comment on a very specific basis on the park designs and the open space system. And I will get to some of their specific comments in a minute. That was on June 1st. On the 9th of June, we went to the Solano County Airport Land Use Commission The commission has a statutory responsibility to look at compatibility of this project with 2 airport land use plans, both Nut Tree to the north and Travis to the south. And we received a unanimous decision from the commission to adopt a resolution of consistency. The commission emphasized 2 things that you all ought to know about. One is that they wanted to make sure that our detention basins were designed to meet both FAA and local City of Vacaville standards. And that has to do with how quickly they drain and how they're maintained in order not to support waterfowl in an area where we have a fairly busy aircraft flyover pattern. The other thing that was important to the commission was that notices be provided to home buyers and renters in Greentree, simply letting them know of the airport traffic and the noise that comes with it. It's not a significant volume of noise, but it is something to be aware of. And so that was incorporated in their resolution. The important elements that have brought this project to you have to do with housing and balancing that housing with job growth. Unlike most of the projects that Vacaville has seen during these last several decades, Greentree is not a single-family detached housing project. It's a complex, I'll call it a fabric of different densities of housing products that are focused about this central complete street, the extension of Yellowstone Drive, and of Village Drive. Village is, of course, the local commercial street where local services and restaurants will be located. It's just a little bit south of the existing Gilly Way. Thank you, Michael. And I can't tell you how many times I've been out there and looked at that relationship. Every time Gilly Way, the name evades me. However, what is very clear to see when you look at the illustrative plan for the project is that the densities emanate out from the commercial core and those complete streets, starting at between 20 and 24 units to the acre with the apartment project immediately to the north of Village Way, and the townhouse and condominium developments that will come in residential blocks 5 and 6 immediately to the south. Those densities north of Sequoia range from about 11 to 24. And there's a very broad range of product types that are envisioned. Everything from court homes or patio houses to traditional duets, townhouses certainly, stacked condominiums, stacked apartments. And we may see 3-story townhouses. In fact, that's very likely one of the products we'll see that have individual garages incorporated with them. Where we have court homes and manor homes. These are single-family units for all practical purposes that have either a common wall or a very small side yard separating them. And very efficient land use, private streets, parking integrated with garages that meet city standards. But at the same time, much smaller yards, much less maintenance, and like the townhouses adjoining them, it's a housing product that we've essentially adapted from other environments where we have jobs and housing together. And we look specifically at the biotech and high-tech manufacturing industries in town and coming to town and ask the question, what kind of products do those employees want? And the message we got back through a variety of sources, both through the city's economic development department and directly through the industry, were ownership housing opportunities, but without the maintenance responsibility of big single-family houses. And yet at the same time, public amenities, things like paseos connected with walkways that tie to these tree-lined, we call them complete streets. I'll get more to that in a minute. but also supported by public parks and those retail services, all within walking distance. So a very focused effort was made on ensuring that we had proximity to these resources. We had widened public walkways, we had bike trails, and we had ways of connecting these elements of the project without going out onto Leisure Town Road and without circling back through the surrounding adjoining neighborhood. We didn't want to see through traffic. So those were the challenges we faced in laying out the project. The project's master plan, as you can see in this slide, shows the layout of individual lots south of Sequoia. That's the age-restricted senior housing, 4,500 and 6,000 square foot lot products. And as you get to entitlements, when we convene with you again in August, one of the things you'll be asked to do associated with the tentative map for the project is to approve what's called a design exception from city standards. Those two cul-de-sacs that kind of work their way around the existing neighborhood in the middle exceed city standard length. And we did that so that we would not have the opportunity to encourage or accommodate through traffic with the existing neighborhood. We do have an emergency vehicle access that goes through the park that connects those two cul-de-sacs. We have water lines and sewer lines that loop to make sure services are adequate. And we configured the circulation system south of Sequoia with an additional access point directly onto Leisure Town Road, as well as to Sequoia. There's an east-west street called D that comes back to Sequoia, and that's the major pedestrian linkage to get back to the park to the north and the retail to the north. So essentially that senior neighborhood south of Sequoia will have its own recreational services, extensive trails, open space, excuse me, and connectivity back to the rest of the project, but without the need for cars to come out through the existing streets. That was the design challenge that we had to meet. Then north of Sequoia, you'll see in shades of brown the residential blocks. So these represent the different densities between low medium, medium high, and high density, ranging from 11 to 24 units to the acre. Again, where you see the orange or red on the map along Village Way, that's where we approach the highest densities. And traffic disperses there between Orange Drive to the north and Leisure Town Road to the east. I think last time I was here, we talked a little bit about infrastructure.
I'm sorry, Mr. Loki.
Yes.
I hate to interrupt you. Do you mind if we pause just real quick and see if anyone has any questions?
Certainly. Yeah.
Anyone have? I just had one little small question about the Land Use Commission. You mentioned that there was a finding of consistency. Well, can you just give us a brief, description of what is that? How does that work?
Every county, or nearly every county in the state, has an airport land use commission. They're normally operated on an adjunct basis with county government, but they're technically independent. And the role of the commission is to administer the land use plans for the two airports in your case. And there must be a finding, as the government code requires in California, that when you have projects that are within the sphere of influence of those airports, that the projects not conflict with airport operations. So buildings can't be so high as to conflict with the conical approach and takeoff zones from the airports. We're nowhere near that here. We'd have to be something like 200 feet tall to have a conflict. But there's a whole variety of policy embedded in the two airport land use plans, both Nut Tree and Travis, that have to do with efficiency of operations, safety especially, and a variety of other functions that the airports serve. So in our case, the important consideration was increasingly over time and in certain situations where there are wetland features or where there are ponding of water for any reason, waterfowl can accumulate. And there's obviously a correlation between the growth of vegetation in those ponds, like the golf course ponds that are there today, and geese that land and take off when they hear noise, and that can cause a problem for aircraft. So the commission and their staff, to their credit, asked your staff and us in advance questions about how quickly our detention basins will drain. FAA standards require drainage in 48 hours. City standards require 24 hours. So after a major storm event, these detention basins fill up, but they release the water out at a fairly brisk pace, but not so fast that it would represent an increase in water leaving the site compared to conditions today. So we can't have any net increase in the rate of drainage coming out of those ponds, but at the same time, we have to build them big enough to handle the 100-year storm, to make sure we don't have any flooding conditions, and to make sure that they drain per city standards. And there has to be a maintenance function along with that. So City of Vacaville does a great job in maintaining its basins. One of the things that we, the project team and your staff have been working on these past weeks is something called a development agreement. That will come to you in August as well. And it looks at all of the services that the city has to provide to meet the needs of residents and businesses in Green Tree, and how those services are paid for, and the correlation between revenues the project will generate, property tax, in lieu vehicle tax, Measure M funds, all of those things that come with the project, and the cost of maintaining parks, maintaining roads, maintaining open space and detention basins. All of that is factored in. We're very close to having a final report from the independent consultant, Bay Area Economics, that did that study, and you'll see that ahead of your next meeting. But that was something, not the fiscal report, but the issue of maintenance that the commission asked us. How will these things be maintained? How are they funded? Do we have certainty that they'll be funded in perpetuity? And so we needed to know that the project would generate enough revenue funds to pay for all that. Any other questions before I start talking about a little more about detention basins? Okay. So, blue on the map, detention basins. The specific plan and particularly the environmental impact report have a very substantial amount of information addressing these. Our project team and civil engineer retained an expert in hydrology. Their name is Balance. They performed modeling on these basins. The city in turn had another outside consultant review those reports, and then the Public Works Department itself went through the reports. All of this is to say there was a very robust analysis of not only changes in hydrology over time, changes with global warming, but what conditions would look like in a 100-year storm once this project is built. We will be adding a lot of impervious surfaces, so water runs off much more quickly. Those basins have to be big enough to accommodate that. And at the same time, we've tasked the designers to make sure the basins were also big enough to handle additional runoff coming from the Leisure-Town neighborhood to our west, where as one of the appendices to the EIR shows, there is flooding that occurs on a semi-regular basis every few years in a major storm. Not a 100-year storm, but a 10-year storm. And we get those more frequently than 10 years once in a while, you probably know. So we've designed those basins to do that. There is one piece of infrastructure that has nothing to do with the project itself that still has to be completed. As was called to our attention by our engineers early on and by folks in the Leisure Town neighborhood during a Saturday meeting we had a couple weeks back. And that's an existing city storm drain pipe located in Yellowstone Drive. And 2 points where that pipe crosses Yellowstone and then goes through easements between houses before it enters the project boundary. There's a couple different conditions, but I'll generalize by saying that where we have 12-inch pipe, or a 15-inch pipe, it has to be upgraded to a 24-inch pipe. That's to get the water out of that, off those streets and into the basins that we're building. It's off-site. The project doesn't make it worse. The project can do just fine without it, but we have elevated this issue because of its importance to the neighborhood as something that jointly we and the city would like to solve. And so we're looking at ways of funding that. And I am hopeful when we come back to you that we'll have answers to that question. I don't this evening. So we have a very complete storm drain system for the project. We have detention basins that handle the project and can handle the overflow occurring in the neighborhood today, the next door neighborhood. And we're looking at ways of upgrading a pipe that needs to be upgraded to get that water out off of Yellowstone and into our basins. That was more of a description that I expected to give tonight, but I wanted you to hear it because we're spending a lot of time on this issue. We know it's of importance, and we don't want to leave that issue dangling.
Do you have sources of funding that are potential sources, or you're just like an open book?
Well, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I will say it's an existing city street with an existing city storm drain system that turns out isn't quite adequate to handle conditions under today's built environment. We're not sending any water that way. We're not backing up water that way. I was reminded by a couple folks that 3-4 years ago, our clients in cooperation with the city spent some money to clean those pipes out, and it improved things. But the modeling tells us it's not good enough. The modeling tells us the pipes need to be upsized. And, you know, a lot of what we're doing here and the conclusions we're talking to you about flow from a very technical environmental impact report analysis with a lot of smart people in many different disciplines contributing to it. People who are experts on energy and climate change, on hydrology, civil engineering, all working together to make sure we understand the problem and look at alternatives to solve it. I'll tell you in direct answer to your question, Chairman Klein, we are looking at use of impact fees, potentially as one source to help solve it. We're looking at expanding the project's responsibility on engineering design to design the upgraded improvement plans for those pipes. There's roughly $1 million beyond that still has to be brought to bear. And how that gets solved is a subject of some negotiations going on. I guess my sense of, and my client, Green Tree Development Group's sense of responsibility here is to make sure the problem gets solved, not just to point it out. On to the Parks Commission for a moment. They looked at both park plans and were, I would say, enthusiastically supportive of both of the preliminary master plans. We spent some time talking with respect to both parks about fencing as one issue. And there is a strong desire, both by the project team, the neighborhood, and I believe the commission, though it's not a final decision, to use a fence that is half masonry, half decorative iron, so that people who look out over the golf course today will be able to look out over those detention basins, because we have, in all cases, either park or open space adjoining the existing neighborhood. So where you have a detention basin next to homes, as is the case in the Green Tree North Park, that can be a completely open fence, or it can be the existing fence. But where the park itself, the public park, interfaces with the neighborhood, that's where we're looking to use this split fence. The commission reserved the right and requested that once we're through project entitlements, assuming we get there, that the detailed improvement plans for those parks come back to the commission one more time to have a final look. And there are details that they'll want to look and make sure are there when that happens. One of those details has to do with the Green Tree South neighborhood park. Again, a public park, a little smaller than that 6-acre park. This is 4.5 acres. And you'll see kind of right in the middle, kind of a tan-colored blob, which is a dog run, a fenced-in dog run. Something that the park master plan embraces, the new one the city just adopted. And one of the comments from the commission was they'd like to see that somewhat enlarged and made into 2 dog areas. Big dogs, little dogs. They don't always play well together, as Michael and I both know. And so there's plenty of room to do that. We have some unique features in this park, including a small amphitheater, a putting green, and some parking. Typically, city neighborhood parks don't have parking in them, neighborhood parks. We did it in this case at both access points, even though we have street frontage parking, because this park, I'll say almost uniquely, services a senior clientele, both within Green Tree and especially the surrounding neighborhood. And we know there are ADA requirements. There are some folks who can't walk those distances. We wanted to make it convenient for them. So we did include some parking. We were very careful to keep all of our activity areas removed from the perimeter homes so as to make sure we had maximum compatibility. I think the Parks Commission recognized that. And of course, we've been working with the liaison committee of representatives of the Leisure Town neighborhood. They've been seeing the evolution of these plans and been giving input to us as we've been moving through the process. I'm going to go through this slide very quickly. I think you folks saw this when we were here in May. We've got embedded in our specific plan our design guidelines, and as part of the design guidelines is a master sign program. We employed a very specialized consultant to look at city standards, look at what's been done in the marketplace, and to come up with something that would be a unifying element for all of Green Tree. The reports that you'll see on the EIR and sometimes even in staff reports may talk about Green Tree as 2 neighborhoods. I bristle at that because we have tried very hard to make this one integrated neighborhood, linked together with everything from complete streets and trails, access to parks, and even, yes, signage. It's important to show not necessarily uniformity, but the integration of design concepts throughout the project. And signage is a part of that unifying element.
Okay. Right here. So the mentioned that the city's standards. Can you tell us a little bit more about the vocabulary that's in place for design of signs? I mean, this doesn't look to me like anything that I've seen in other neighborhoods, so I'm just curious what the consistency is
Well, you'll see use of materials that are a unifying element. The masonry base is certainly not new to the city of Vacaville, but the use of the and the shape that that rolling hill shape is a city symbol for parks, but the use of Corten steel is different. And we've incorporated that into almost all of the signs. We've tried to keep signs small, keep them at a human scale, but make them, position them where they're visible. And by doing that, it declutters the landscape, the pedestrian landscape, and it makes those signs work a little better, we think. The text on the signs is integrated. Michael is our resident expert on this program, and I would defer to him if he wants to add anything more about the unifying components of the master sign program.
I would just add that the project was originally designed around walkability, and it was important for us to have everybody from the senior neighborhoods over to the residential neighborhoods be able to have access to the complete streets which lead up to the commercial areas. And it was important to have unifying signs so that everybody knew where they were going, where the shops are located, kind of directs traffic. It also directs pedestrians. And then as Dick mentioned, we wanted to have the unifying hills on the park signage. And that took some creativity, but we were able to come up with a design that is very similar to the existing city standards and city signs, but is a little bit different.
It's, it's design flair, and neither of us can take credit for it, but I will say that Michael worked very hard with our consultants to make sure that we're looking at placement of signs, as he just pointed out, not just along the park access routes, but the trails. We've got 3 miles, nearly 3 miles of trails, public trails in Green Tree. They connect the existing neighborhoods as well as the south of Sequoia neighborhood to the complete streets. And I've used that term twice now. Some of you may have looked in the specific plan, opened the hood and looked at the cross sections. You'll see that what we have are 10-foot sidewalks. We have bike lanes that are not just striped to be separate from the travel lanes, but have a barrier separating them from the travel lanes. 2.5, 3 feet in width, 3 feet. And then we have travel lanes themselves that are a foot narrower. And we use bulb outs where we come to the important intersections so that pedestrians get a good view at traffic in both directions before they cross. We used speaking of traffic calming, because it's an important part of not only the extension of Yellowstone, but where it connects with Sequoia. We have this small diameter format roundabout that has been carefully engineered and then peer reviewed by the city's outside consultant for safety, functionality. Can garbage trucks, can delivery trucks get through it? What do the police and fire think about it? Had to work for everybody. But we needed to replace that awkward 3-way intersection where you have to look over your shoulder as you proceed through it to something that works safely, could handle traffic flow, and slow cars down. Because we want the pedestrian to be king when it comes to that crossing. We want them to be able to cross Sequoia, cross Yellowstone safely. And the only way to do that when you have traffic is to bring the traffic to a stop. And that's what it does. And then as you go further up to the, or down to the southwest along Yellowstone, we have a traffic calming program that consists of 2 radar detection display pieces of equipment that will be positioned at locations that the city traffic engineer ultimately will finalize. She's tentatively selected to let people know how fast they're going. And then we have at Teton a protected pedestrian crossing with pedestrian actuated flashing strobe lights and special signage and marking on the pavement. Because it is important that that south of Sequoia neighborhood park be accessible to the existing neighborhood and safely accessible. This isn't a boulevard. Yellowstone is a two-lane local street, but we have seen a lot of real evidence, not just anecdotal stories, but real evidence of people speeding and traffic platooning in a way that makes it difficult for pedestrians safely to get across. So this is to attack that problem. The fiscal analysis, I've already given you kind of a preview. It looks at all of the elements of servicing cost, all the project revenues. It does it in a way that, to the city's satisfaction, hopefully, and certainly based on the independent economic consultants' standard practice, investigates all of these costs and quantifies them. At the end of the day, what it's supposed to do is show us what it will cost to service Green Tree for all city departments in relationship to revenues that Green Tree brings in. And it's no secret that those numbers are showing a pretty net substantial revenue to the city, positive upside. Those numbers have yet to be fully vetted with city staff, although the report was just completed this week. So it's an important part of the planning process, because local government needs to understand, when considering a project, especially the scale of Green Tree, what does it do to our general fund? What does it do to our ability to maintain service levels in parks, on streets, et cetera? This is the number crunching that supports those answers. Public benefits, part of what a development agreement looks at, but at a basic level, at a planning level, it's more than just whether a project is consistent with your general plan. And Green Tree isn't. Let's be clear. We're seeking a general plan amendment. We have commercial recreation land use designation on this property. We have some commercial zoning, and we have some commercial recreation and related zoning on the property. We're changing all that to specific plan, so that the specific plan, as it will be adopted by ordinance, becomes the tool that implements the general plan policies and that implements the on-the-ground zoning for the project. And through the specific plan, we have development standards. Most of those standards comply with the city's standard zoning code. In a couple cases, we deviate. For example, these higher density housing products have some variation in setbacks, side to side. In some cases, rear yards. There is a subtle difference in parking standards by purpose, I guess I should say. And I can't help but doing this. Please indulge me for a moment. Michael's gonna look down and be embarrassed. This is a magazine I have subscribed to as a charter member from the first year it was ever published. Planning Magazine. It's the national magazine of the American Association of Planners, APA, and it devoted 6 pages to building a case for dropping parking standards. What does that mean? It means that in today's struggle to make development efficient and to meet the needs of people, that we look carefully at shared trips. We look at where we can meet needs locally without drawing people across town to get groceries or to have lunch. Local services. And in so doing, can you get people there by bicycle and car, and on foot instead of the car? Walkability. And that sounds like a big mantra to talk about getting rid of parking. We're not doing that with Green Tree. What we are doing is treating the parking ratios in the commercial development on an averaged basis. So if we have a sandwich shop, we don't count the number of seats. Or a sit-down restaurant, we don't count the number of seats. Similarly, we don't treat the grocery store parking ratio differently than we do the shoe store. What we do is set a uniform per 1,000 square foot standard of 3.5 spaces. And this is, in some circles, considered to be a pretty conservative standard today. There are communities that push for lower parking standards, and we would have gone for lower standards yet, were it not for the fact that this is an infill project and we need to make sure we're not putting a lot of extra cars on the streets. But we think that putting those higher densities next to the retail will result in foot traffic that works. Guest parking. We meet the city standards on guest parking. However, I said it wrong. On housing, we meet the city standards, except that with respect to guest parking, we provide 1 space for every 4 units, guest parking, instead of 1 space for every 3 units. Very subtle difference, but we believe with the amenities in the project that those parking ratios are appropriate. And in some respects, we wish we'd gone a little further. So we're trying to be responsible about how we use resources, land resources. We're trying to accommodate workforce housing directly across from where we have jobs coming. You know, we know that Genentech is an important player in Vacaville's industrial market. We know that a Genesis is coming to town, and we know that another big name biotech manufacturer just announced, and that some 10,000 additional jobs will be coming to the business park. So we're not the answer to all the housing needs for the business park, but we're so close, physically connected close, that having the right mix of housing, we think, will help to cut down over time on vehicle miles traveled between people who live in this kind of housing in Davis or in Napa or in Contra Costa, and those jobs that are coming to this world-class business park here in Vacaville. And by the way, all of the residential units in Green Tree will be electric service, no natural gas. So in addition to meeting Title 24 requirements, solar access, solar panels, charging stations, all of the needs of the housing of all of the housing units, right down to our apartment project, will be electric. So with that, let me conclude by putting us back in perspective as to where we are. One more slide forward, please. Here we are in the middle of July. We're hoping and expecting that the final environmental impact report will be completed at the end of the first week in August, so that you, the commission, and the public will have roughly 10 days' time to see it before you're asked to consider the project entitlements, the tentative map, the specific plan, the related general plan change, and the development agreement. And after you're done, your consideration will be forwarded to the council. These will be legislative actions, so the council will have to either adopt or not adopt the ordinances and resolutions that you recommend. And that's kind of where we are today, an overview. I'm going to stop talking at this point and see if we have some more questions.
You know, what I'd like to do, is just use my prerogative to give the community members I see are here, give them an opportunity if they'd like to be heard. Give the developer about a half hour, but for each of you, maybe 5 minutes or less, if you'd like to be heard on this. And then, sorry with you, Mr. Loki, we'll invite you back up for questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Marjorie Kelly. I live in Leisuretowne on Teton, and I am one of the liaisons, and I'm happy to say that we have met on a very regular basis with city staff and with the planning group, the Lokis. I have been involved in this for over 6.5 years now, personally. And Lynn in the audience has been involved a few days longer than that even. But the progress that we have made in the last 1.5 years has been really remarkable. And we're really quite pleased with how much progress we've made and where this plan is going at this time. So I would like to, maybe something you don't hear a lot, but I would like to express appreciation for the city staff, their dedication in meeting with us, and for the Lokis who have been extraordinarily receptive to our feedback, including our feedback on the environmental impact. And so we're pretty we haven't seen the final product yet, but we're pretty optimistic at this point that this project is resulting in the kind of neighborhood that we really want and appreciate. So thank you to all.
Neighborhood you deserve. Thank you, Ms. Kelly.
I also am receptive to questions if you have any.
Do you want to describe the community outreach which I hear has been excellent with the Loki group?
Well, one of the things that we do is meet monthly in a joint meeting between the liaisons and the Lokis and city staff, including most recently with Erin herself. And so we are just able to give our feedback right straight to the community development director, and that has been very useful. They have been, when we prepared our comments on the environmental impact, we did have a sit-down meeting with city staff to go through those comments and say, this is what we're talking about, this is why it's important to us, and so forth. And we believe that they have listened and that the final environmental impact is going to have some positive solutions and progress on the areas that we're interested in. Other things that we have done in our community and that the Lokis and city staff have participated in, we've had a program of what we call walk-in Saturdays over the last few years, where we just schedule a very casual, come on over, look at the maps, talk to the liaisons, and we'll answer your questions and chat on an informal basis. And that's been very useful in our neighborhood. The last one we had, both of the Lokis, Dick and Michael, showed up, and we had really quite a healthy turnout, considering that it was Memorial Day weekend and everybody wanted to be at the parade or at a barbecue. But they were gracious, stayed. They did a presentation, and residents were able to ask their questions and get answers to the things that they're interested in. So those are a few of the things that we've been able to do. And, I appreciate we've had an opportunity to talk to some of you over the months and years and bring you up to speed with what we're interested in. So that's been appreciated as well.
And this started to a merit hearing, is that correct?
Early on, that was one of the first things that happened. This is really years ago. Mm-hmm. At the very beginning, there was a merit hearing with the city council to make the determination whether there was sufficient need for this project to allow it to go forward. And that merit hearing was important to the developers to be able to fund the city staff time to work on the project. And so, yeah, there was a merit hearing. It did pass the city council. That was at quite some time ago.
Thank you.
Anything else?
So I'll, no question. So, we're able to meet with the group and listen, and the hope is, and it sounds like some progress has been made
Yeah.
since that time, so I'm happy to hear that. Thank you for being here, Mark.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for being interested. And this is, you know, we live there. And, you know, one of the things that we have said, both to city staff and to the developers, is this isn't a tomato field. You know, you can have all of your requirements about streets and fencing and connectivity and so on and so on, but it's right across my back fence. So it changes the nature of the planning and the importance when you have an established neighborhood with established values, including things like the view. We lived on a golf course, and so that view became very important. So we have discussions, therefore, about fences, and please don't cut off our view. We have had discussions about streets not funneling traffic into our existing streets. And that extensive cul-de-sacs, 2 cul-de-sacs, so it's very long cul-de-sacs, were really a very creative solution to an issue that was very important to us, to not have development traffic dumped into our streets. One of the things we value in Leisure Town is the quiet and the lack of, you know, speeding, the lack of hearing motorcycles and cars late at night and so on and so forth. So that became very important, and this was a really very excellent solution. I would say one of the other things we really appreciate is that park on the south of Sequoia. That is just an amenity that we actually didn't even think we could get. And so we've not had a park in our neighborhood. The golf course served as a park because it was considered recreation, open space recreation. And so having this park and having the things in it, like the dog park and like the putting green, a little sop to the former golf course, these are really important items for us. And so we're really quite thrilled about that.
Well, thank you for your involvement, and we appreciate time.
Thank you.
I see one other neighborhood.
Good afternoon or good evening, Planning Commission and public and staff. My name is Roberto Valdez. I hope you can hear me because I'm gonna keep my mask on if possible. And I have, you know, even though I'm a longtime Vacaville resident, as you know, and I've made some comments before, and I've also submitted comments to your Planning Commission. Again, even though I don't live there, and I appreciate what the developer at least was listening to when I brought up the last comments about signage, especially in that mile-long trail, to educate the public to have the least impact on the wildlife there. And I submitted some other stuff to Mr. Payment Beamer, the city planner for this project. Anyway, I'm here just a clarification, 3 items. Number 1, and I don't know if you can clarify this for the developer or whoever. I'm responding to an article that was put on the Reporter on September 16th. I can pass it to you or leave it here, whoever.
Give it to this, our staff
But I
table.
will, just so you can see it. And I just want to, like, they portrayed this project as a redevelopment project. I don't see it as that. I've looked at the documents, the DER. It doesn't say anything about a redevelopment. It's not what I consider a redevelopment project unless there's something, other criteria that the city is following or the developer. To me, it's just plain and simple. It's a development project in what used to be open space golf course. That's how I see it. That's become wildlife, more wild, with negligence, who knows what. Anyway, I'm not pointing fingers to anybody. So I just want clarification. What is this? Is this a development project or a redevelopment? And if so, where is this funding coming from? The developer, from the city, from the state, from the federal? Where? Okay, I think that needs to be clarified for the public's sake. The other point I want to make to you, and pardon me if I go to the next point, I want to hear from the developer or whoever in your staff, how is this project fitting into the surrounding neighborhood? I think the previous speaker spoke about, they're trying to have the last impact in their lives, quality of life, neighborhood. How does that fit into this whole project? Are you creating another project? And I don't think so. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt to the developer too, that you're not building this project in a vacuum. In other words, you're just focused on this project and who cares what happens with the rest of the city of Vacaville, Okay? So please clarify if you can, it's briefly or the point is there a way to get some sort of a glimpse as to what kind of public comments have been submitted at this point, rather than to wait for the final FEIR? Anyway, and that's it. I've submitted my points, may submit more. I know other people are interested in this project who not necessarily live there, do not live there, but they're interested where we're going with this kinds of project. That's it. Thank you.
For your time and involvement.
I'll step down or.
And we'll invite Mr. Loki up to answer some of the questions and provide a response. Please, yes, please. Your floor is yours, sir. Thank you.
I made note of a couple, 3 questions. I'll try and be brief. Is this a redevelopment project? We're not dealing in the realm of government-sponsored redevelopment here. This is redevelopment of a golf course. It's also an infill project, but I think Mr. Valdez is correct. It is simply a development project that has those attributes. All the funding is private. How does the project fit into the surrounding neighborhood? Well, that is the $64 question. It's the point that we have been working on all of these years to make sure that we got right. It's the traffic, it's the circulation, it's the mobility plan, the trail connections, the park locations, the street improvements, the complete streets, all of those things. And you, the commission, will be the best judges of that at the end of the day. We've done our best to make sure that it integrated as smoothly and thoroughly without dividing neighborhoods as we possibly could. And finally, public comments. Well, I do know that all of the comments submitted have gone to the city's EIR consultants. These were, after all, comments on the draft EIR. And I know they're working very hard to produce the final EIR, which is not far away. It's only a short time before we'll all see it. It will have those comments. It will have responses to all those comments. Again, these are environmental impact comments now, not whether you like the project or don't like the project. And it will include any edits that city staff and the EIR consultants believe are necessary to the draft EIR. So it should be kind of an all-inclusive and thorough document. Did I miss anything? Any other questions?
Well, before you take your seat, I just want to thank you very much for your time, and it's been a notable improvement. I think the community is very happy. I've met with the community, and I think this set a model of excellence that hopefully others will follow to see how to work with the community and develop a project.
Thank you. Truth be told, I've been doing this for 45 years. And when Michael and I were approached by Jim Sire and his family, Green Tree Development Group, to take on management of this project, we were a little stunned because of its scope. And it took us a good month of reading to begin to understand the complexities of these issues. And if we had not had a very open and helpful city staff and a liaison committee to fill in the blanks, everything that we couldn't read on paper, we would not have been able to get our arms around the issues we have. And it's not a perfect world. We haven't solved every issue, and I'm not here to suggest otherwise, but I think we understand the issues, and I think there's been a genuinely cooperative, collaborative effort to solve the problems. Thank you.
Thank you for your attentiveness. With that, oh, sure, of course, yeah. I thought you said question back. Of course. Floor is yours, Mr. Stockton.
Yes, my name is Ken Stockton. I'm here with my beautiful wife, Karen, who some of you know. The first thing I'd like to say is I couldn't be more thrilled with the overall project and the planning, and I'd like to personally thank anybody and everybody that put in their time working on it. I think given the situation we were in 6 years ago, we couldn't be happier with what it looks like we may end up with. I was ecstatic to hear about the piping going across Yellowstone. Thank you, sir. Appreciate that a lot, because me and my wife have flooded. We've been there 16 years and we've flooded multiple times. So that's great. Question I have is, I saw on the documents that were online for this meeting, a proposed traffic signal on Leisuretowne Road. I'm wondering, because you can't really tell where it's located, because the county property that's opposite it is not shown very well. So I'm wondering if somebody can comment as to where that might go or where it's going to go, the new traffic signal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stockton. Mr. Lokey, do you mind coming back to the podium?
That's as good a place as any. Thank you, Kathy. There are actually 3 signal lights that are contemplated with this project. The first is a upgrade of an existing signal on Leisuretowne Road at Sequoia Drive. There's a left turn pocket headed northbound at that location. And we're, of course, widening Sequoia as the city is widening Leisuretowne, and we have turn movements with more traffic going in all directions. So this will become a much more complete intersection, and that existing signal light will be replaced with a complete phased signal light that integrates with the signal further to the north. So as then you proceed north on Leisuretowne Road, where Village Way comes down, that's our street that connects between Orange and Leisuretowne. We have signal lights at both ends of that street. That street is also a complete street. It also has the protected bike lanes, the widened sidewalks, the bulb outs, and there's a intersection of Yellowstone and Village that is controlled in the same way. So I guess the direct answer to the question is there's a second planned signal light at Village Way and Leisure Town. We have deceleration lanes planned in Village Way as well as in Leisure Town, so as to accommodate turf movements without slowing down the through traffic on Leisure Town Road. That's important from a traffic operations standpoint, as Gwen Owen would tell you if she were here this evening. We worked carefully between our traffic engineers and Gwen to make sure that got addressed correctly. What I'm missing is right on the other side. So that's going to be a new street. Existing Gilly Way will come out. Village Way will go in. The alignment of Village Way is in the same place as the existing entrance to the golf course. It's opposite Poplar. Yep, so it becomes a full four-way intersection.
Man's a magician. Look forward to seeing you again in August, and thank you very much again for everyone who spoke. I'm assuming, do you have any more? So we're going to close that item and invite Director Morris to drill us with the Vice Chair Fortney has been trying to make a comment. Go ahead, Mike.
Or Mr. Loki disappeared on it. Well, we're not at the finish line yet, but you deserve some kudos for actually listening to the residents, staff, so everybody on your team. Kudos to that. My question to you is, you mentioned charging stations. Will all new residential housing have capable of charging stations in their garage or on their carports on the site? Will the multifamily have charging stations? And on our commercial development, will we have charging stations? And are we looking at regular charging stations, or do we have the capability of having the rapid? Are you at that point where you could just give us that information, or are we next month? Okay. Thank you, Michael.
So I believe the answer to that is that we meet Build It Green Tier 2 standards for EV parking at the commercial and multifamily, and that requires a percentage of the spaces have EV charging ready. I believe that percentage is 15. I'd have to double check in the specific plan. It's at least 15.
But he is
And
hitting
then,
that point on, yeah, go ahead, please.
And then the homes themselves, the single family homes, will have capability to.
However, there is a point about the high rapid charge. That too early to know about that, or?
Know that.
Okay.
I'd have to look at the specifics. We are required to meet Cal Green, Build It Green here. I'd have to see what is required on that.
I don't know if they require rapid charging, but that's more of that's like a detail that is, I'm with Mike on anyone who drives an electric car, you want to charge quick.
We can find an answer for next. Great.
Great. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Director Morris, the floor is yours.
Hello, I haven't actually approached this commission from this particular spot, so hoping it will go well. So tonight I'm going to be doing a brief, and I do say brief, it's a 17-slide presentation on the California Environmental Quality Act. That does count this slide. The purpose of tonight's presentation is not to train the Planning Commission on how to prepare CEQA documents or become CEQA consultants. This is really more of a high-level presentation that explains what the law is, what it requires, and how the city of Vacaville applies it. At the end of this presentation, should you want to know more, I'd be happy to come back with more, but I was hoping that we would all be awake and engaged during these 17 slides, so I'm trying to take it a little bit easy on this commission. So we're going to talk about the background and purpose of CEQA. We're going to talk about some key terms that are used a lot, and I'm going to explain what those terms mean. I'm going to give a brief overview of how the city approaches CEQA, once we talk about what it is, how we do it here. And then I'm going to leave you with staff's key considerations related to CEQA as professional staff supporting this commission and this city, as well as the things I think that you ought to consider your key considerations. So, onward. The California Environmental Quality Act, it was enacted in 1970, modeled after something called NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act. And this was really when California really still was a leader, even though we followed the national effort. CEQA brought the whole idea of environmental impact assessment and public disclosure to the state and absolutely changed the way land use planning is done. And all kinds of work, government stuff, was affected by CEQA. It is the cornerstone of environmental policy in California, and I probably will just keep calling it CEQA for the rest of this presentation. It's shorter. So the purpose of CEQA, it's, some people think it's to stop projects, some people think it's to make things hard, some people have all kinds of ideas about it, but really, it's a public disclosure tool. And really the purpose of CEQA from the beginning is to inform the public and the people who are making decisions about city business or county business, any kind of public agency business, that they're informed of the potential environmental effects of whatever this action is that they're considering taking. It requires that if a proposal is going to have significant environmental effects, and we'll talk about what that is in a minute, that mitigation or measures that could reduce that effect be identified and implemented. That language, to the extent feasible, is should be a defined CEQA term. It is actually defined in courts. But the idea is we tell people what the environmental effects will be, we figure out ways to reduce those effects, and this is a very transparent public process with a lot of information. CEQA itself is not a project decision. It's not like an approval or denial of a project, but we have to do it as part of governmental decision-making. And everything that comes to you pretty much will have a CEQA determination because of the nature of the work the commission does. So when does CEQA apply? I used to be the City of Santa Rosa's environmental coordinator, and I reviewed CEQA for every single thing that was on any council agenda, planning commission agenda, including the purchasing of buses, pens, personnel decisions, et cetera. And so I want to focus this group on kind of generally what comes before you. So as a city of Vacaville, and I have a slide that goes into more detail, if it's a ministerial decision, building permit for a water heater, CEQA does not apply. But anytime we are exercising judgment, where there's going to be actually it could be staff exercising judgment, where there's going to be a decision to approve or deny an activity that's subject to CEQA, that's a project under CEQA, and we have to go through this process. And I have some slides that break it down a little bit more in my deck. The key thing with CEQA, and this is something I've gotten a lot of questions from not just commissioners, but members of the public, it's kind of, when do you do CEQA? You just do it after you figure out the project and you're done and you're just kind of like wrapping it up with a bow, that's CEQA. Do you do it like really early because we need to know soon? And the idea is that we want it to occur, it has to occur under the law before any project is approved. You don't need to do it if you're going to deny a project. So that's going to be a streamlining effect, I suppose. But the goal we have is to do it early enough to figure out what are these potential environmental effects that might be able to be addressed by redesigning the project or just making adjustments to the project. We also need to do it and complete it late enough in our development review process because it does actually need to be an evaluation of this project, this final proposal that's going before the decision maker. And really, we can't prepare CEQA until we have sufficient information about the project, exactly what it is, where it is, how tall it is, how many units, all those technical studies, have to have all that in order to come to any final conclusions about environmental effects. So I would say CEQA is happening all the time in my offices, in my department, my planning staff, for everything that comes through our shop. And I'll explain more about some of the different ways we achieve CEQA compliance. So here's our process, and this is definitely the nutshell. If you were becoming assistant planners at our city, you would go through a much more excruciating training and you'd be applying this stuff every day. But really, quite simply, as the planning department, as the lead on development review, receives new applications, there's kind of this three-step questioning process we go through. So is this action that we're looking at a project subject to CEQA? And almost everything that comes through planning is, even if you're just doing a small addition to your garage of even like 20 square feet. If it requires planning review, it's not just a building permit, then it's subject to CEQA, and it's probably exempt, and I'll go through that in a moment. And if it's exempt from CEQA, we have to actually figure out why. The state has a list of more than 33 categorical exemptions we might apply, also has a list of, not hundreds, but a lot of statutory exemptions. So if it's subject to it, yes, no. If it is subject to it, is it exempt? And then if it's not exempt, that's when CEQA gets certainly more rich, which is when we're figuring out, well, what is the way we're going to look at this for CEQA, and what is the process we're going to follow? So,
Morris, can I just ask a clarifying question?
Of course.
You mentioned categorical exemptions and statutory exemptions. Can you explain the difference?
I have slides on that, because yeah,
Okay.
they're exempt is this very broad term, right? Is it exempt? And then there's different types of exemptions, and in our process, we'd like to see if it's exempt, and if it's not, then we have to keep going down the ladder of inquiry, if you will. I have a slide on that in just a moment. So going back actually to that first question, is it a project? I want to make this clear because I think there is sometimes some confusion. Anything that's a discretionary decision is subject to CEQA. This is this exercising of judgment. So almost everything that comes here to this planning commission besides these trainings is probably subject to CEQA. You'll review conditional use permits, subdivisions, zoning changes, specific plans, all kinds of stuff, and those are all subject to CEQA. Ministerial actions, which happen at both in the city in general and in my department specifically, by the time someone's getting a building permit, it could be implementing an approved project that already had CEQA, but really a building permit is issued if you meet fixed standards. So that's considered a ministerial action, not subject to CEQA. Business licenses, when the city issues them, they're ministerial. Demolition permits are mostly ministerial, but let's say you wanted to come in and knock down a historic building in the building division, that would actually not happen. We'd have to have you go back through that planning process to get the CEQA out of the way, if that is what was approved, to then come in with a demo permit. So we have a project, it's subject to CEQA, it's not exempt, or we've gone through this process of figuring it out. So if we determine it's not exempt for whatever reason, we have to figure out, okay, how are we going to cover it? So my third bullet is, we ask ourselves, was this project covered under previous environmental review? And in Vacaville, that happens quite a bit. We have EIRs for master plan developments, and this is a tentative map that's come in maybe 10 years later, and they're building it out. And we go, oh yeah, this was actually covered under that previous EIR. You all will actually, as part of approving some things, see some fairly aged CEQA documents that are from EIRs that were done a while, and we have to look at them and make sure their conclusions are still valid, and there's a whole legal framework for that. But as part of this ladder of inquiry, we will look to see whether whatever we're reviewing is actually covered under a previous environmental document. It's not exempt, it's not clearly covered. We may prepare an initial study, and I don't want to go into a whole bunch of details, but it's basically a checklist where you go through all these topical areas to figure out, are there traffic impacts? Are there water resources impacts? And so you go through that to figure out whether there are significant impacts and whether or not these impacts can be mitigated. This can lead to a mitigated negative declaration, or an EIR. This commission, you'll see a lot of exemptions. You'll see some mitigated and negative declarations. You'll see reuse of environmental documents like older EIRs or even newer EIRs, and occasionally you'll see other methods. My point to you is you don't need to memorize all these specifics. Our reports will tell you what we've determined and what we think is the approach, and you'll have that information. But staff is always going through this inquiry process, essentially trying to find the most efficient way to clear projects while making sure that we are in fact disclosing environmental impacts and doing things properly. The decision maker, which is the planning commission on a lot of our projects, and sometimes it's a council, and sometimes it's staff, makes the final CEQA determination when they're considering the project decision. So that's when all of this really is in front of you. You've got this, it'll be with Green Tree, for example, that one has an EIR, that will be in front of you along with the project decisions, and they will typically travel as a package. So that is that part. So now, Chair Klein, statutory exemptions are activities that the state of California has determined are not subject to CEQA review. My favorite one, which is at the bottom of this slide, is they've determined that when cities restripe streets, and it doesn't matter where they are not subject to CEQA. And so all you have to do as a city is go, look, we have 15282J, and so you're done. Whenever there's been these kind of high value projects like a stadium in Sacramento, it's interesting because the year or two before that's contemplated, sometimes you'll see a statutory exemption, like exempting a special stadium project from any environmental review. And so this is how the state really steps in and says, you're not going to review that prison or that stadium or whatever these projects are that are deemed important. The categorical exemptions are more more common. I put my three most, I would say the most utilized here in Vacaville and elsewhere I've worked. If you have like an existing, like let's say an existing house and it's historic and maybe you're adding on to it, there's 15301, there's also another one that can be used. And so staff's process is looking at the law. There's actually specific detailed language on all these categorical and statutory exemptions and figuring out, does this project fit with this exemption? The other point I want to make is that we often can cite multiple exemptions, and that's actually a best practice in CEQA. You look at, ooh, this is an existing house, or let's say existing hotel, we're going to add a smaller number of rooms, that's kind of like 15301, but it is also conversion of small structures, which specifies 10,000 square feet as sort of a magic number of square footage, so that one might work. Oh, and the site's less than 5 acres in size, we can also use 15332. Don't be intimidated if we, in our staff report or in our findings of fact, cite multiple exemptions. That is a best practice in CEQA, and really what it gets down to on the practical side is if we were challenged on our CEQA decision, and sometimes cities, like 2 of your exemptions will stand and 1 won't, and as long as 1 stands, you don't have to redo your project approval. Okay, more exemptions. So we talked about categorical and statutory exemptions. The state has actually in the last 10 years really added a lot more exemptions to CEQA. So there's specific exemptions for a project that's consistent with existing zoning, an adopted community plan, or a general plan for which an EIR was prepared. So it shouldn't surprise you if some project will be coming forward in the time ahead that staff says, hey, this is consistent with the 2015 general plan for which an EIR was prepared. And we've looked at it, and we may have even done an initial study, and we've determined we think that that EIR is sufficient and we don't need to do further environmental review. The state brought this one in specifically, again, trying to require the disclosure of CEQA, but also balance it with implementing things that cities had approved and already done CEQA for. There's a newer one that exempts residential projects within a specific plan for which an EIR was prepared. You will see that probably for some downtown specific plan projects. And there's a ton more, but this is not a training for CEQA practitioners, so I'm going to save you from, I think I have a list of 15 different newer exemptions that the state has brought forward in the last 10 years that are trying to help. From our process standpoint, if we determine that the project's exempt under any of these, we draft findings for the decision makers. So you'll see those in your findings of fact and highlighted in your staff report. And we always are happy to answer questions. And we also get public input sometimes, and we're happy to have that open dialogue about the CEQA clearance path. Procedurally, after a project is approved, example, the Land Use and Development Code was approved by the City Council, we go file a document at the county it's a notice that we've made a decision or an exemption or whatever the project requires, and that does limit the legal challenge period following government decision making. And that's something that we do because if the City Council approves something or the Planning Commission approves something, it's presumed that you would like us to make sure that it is able to move forward. I'm putting that out there because that is part of our normal process. Okay, if you can't find an exemption or an existing document that can work, that's when we get into mitigated negative declarations and negative declarations. And every CEQA training I've gone to says this, I'll say this too. A negative declaration is not a bad thing. It's the city, after preparing an initial study, determining that there will not be significant impacts as part of this project. So it's not, there will not be nothing to worry about kind of thing. A mitigated negative declaration is when you can determine you do not have significant impacts that cannot be, that you have them, but they're requiring mitigation measures, things you're going to do with the project to reduce those impacts. Those two kinds of documents, unlike exemptions, have public review periods where the city drafts up the document and puts it out there for public comment for 20 or 30 days, depending on the type of document. These are very appropriate, particularly when you have a project that's not exempt, but you see that all of the potential effects can be mitigated to less than significant. These documents are developed based on this initial study, which is this checklist of all these environmental topics. And typically we also require developers, and sometimes we commission ourselves technical studies that actually deal with biological resources, for example, water supply in the case of big projects, traffic reports, where are the cars going and how are they going to affect our intersections and how are they going to affect BMT. Even in a mitigated negative declaration or negative declaration can actually tier off of a previous environmental document. So sometimes you'll start with the general plan EIR and then you'll do something to kind of add to it. And then the other thing to note with these documents particularly is that they involve coordination with other agencies. So if, for example, the state water Regional Water Quality Control Board is gonna have to issue a permit for the project once the city approves it. Then they are routed the city's environmental document during this public circulation period, and they provide their professional expertise to the city, because ultimately, if our document's adopted, they're going to rely on it for their permitting. So this one definitely involves a heftier amount of coordination with other regional agencies depending on the project. Okay, and then environmental impact reports. This commission, actually this very one, did have their first EIR hearing, where we brought you the Green Tree draft EIR during the public comment period. EIRs are the heftiest type of environmental review. They're still informational documents, much like those initial studies and MNDs that are expected to be helpful to the public and to decision makers. We have to do them in many cases, but particularly when a project is not exempt and when there's environmental impacts that cannot be mitigated, for which, like for example, the city's going to have to say, even though this project's going to have maybe very significant effects on traffic, the city council may want to say, we still want to approve it. We're going to disclose there's an impact, but we still want to approve the project. So EIRs are typically used for more complicated projects. Because they also have more status with the courts, CEQA is one of the most litigated aspects of California law. Sometimes larger projects, even if they don't think they're going to have a significant impact that can't be mitigated, will actually elect to do an EIR because it does provide them a greater level of protection from litigation if the project's approved. So they're not a light undertaking. These add significant cost and time to the development review process, but you will see them from time to time because we do projects that involve them, such as Green Tree. And then this one also, if you're doing an EIR, you're probably, there's other agencies that are actually going to rely on it. So you invite them to participate in scoping the EIR at the beginning. You invite them to review your technical studies and your conclusions. And these state agencies, they will write us back and they will tell us what they think. And they usually have different opinions.
Question on that. When this information goes out to the other participating agencies, is it standard practice for your staff? No response is no comment? I know we've had that discussion before, and I don't know if we're in a gray area of that if they received it and no response means there's no comment.
So we send for an EIR especially, we're sending everything through the state clearinghouse. So the state of California has a hub for all these CEQA documents. And so we're checking boxes, all electronic now, it's not paper anymore like it used to be. We're checking boxes, identifying which agencies we think it has to go to, and then they're also looking at it. But really, it is not uncommon to not hear from all agencies because some of them are just like, we don't have a permitting responsibility, we're too busy to write back, we're not gonna comment. It's really common, in my experience now, in 4 major jurisdictions to always hear back from, like Caltrans, for example. Their comments are always late. I mean, almost always late, but you usually will hear back from them. And the same with the Regional Water Quality Control Board. They're really pretty reliable pen pals with public agencies. And there's a couple others like the Department of Toxic Substance Control. But I don't, this is kind of a, not a secret term. Other agencies, they stay in their lanes too. You know, if the DTSC, Department of Toxic Substance Control, has a site that might have had contamination, like they're going to probably review that and prioritize that and give us comments. But they're probably not going to comment, even no comment on something that's, that doesn't have anything for them. And sometimes you send it to them. I'm not saying you do it just because, but if you have a site that, you're hearing from the public has sensitive habitat, you've done a biological study that says it's not, and you're pretty sure there will be no permits from the Department of Fish and Wildlife, of course you still send it to them as an agency, and they typically will write back. And so to your question, we usually hear back, but we don't always hear back. And it really does depend on their bandwidth and what the issues are that are important to their agency. Any other questions before I proceed to 14 of 17? Okay, this is actually one of my very favorites. I think I've already alluded to this. Another way we can get through CEQA sometimes is this tiering off of existing adopted environmental documents. And I'm just bringing this up because you might see this. If you, let's say, for example, the council certified a downtown specific plan EIR. And that EIR, in this commission recommended on it, might have been the previous group of folks, but that EIR, it actually is intended to clear most of the things that want to happen downtown. But there could be a case where someone comes in on let's say one of the housing sites where we've kind of created a pretty efficient process and they want to do something different. So, and then we have to evaluate that. And we may end up saying, okay, we have this adopted downtown specific plan EIR. This project's a little different, and we document the difference, and that's what comes before this body for a decision. Just an example, but I want you to know that tiering is very common in CEQA, to build off of a certified document to bring forward whatever that information is about the change.
So is another example like VM, we did in the EIR for the VM standards that were adopted?
That was a supplemental EIR, which is another specific term in CEQA. It's like, can you use the EIR? Do you need to supplement it, which means you're recirculating the document out to the public and to all the agencies. You can addend an EIR, which is one of my favorite CEQA efficient ways, but it has to be appropriate to do that, where you're basically documenting what changed from when the EIR was certified to now, and you're concluding that there's no new environmental impacts that were not covered. And these are all, I mean, vaguely forms of tiering.
But with the VMT though, that's supposed to be used by other projects.
Yes.
So that's why we did it.
Yes,
right?
they can rely on it, but they probably won't have to tier from it. They'll just reference it as the clearance for the VMP component of their projects. That's definitely a streamlining supplemental EIR that the city got done. Okay, we're almost done with this, and there's a lot, as you can tell, and I'm happy to answer questions. So for staff, I'm speaking for my department now. I didn't talk to all my people that work here, but we are really interested in addressing CEQA appropriately when we bring you development review projects and we bring you policies, and that's of keen interest to me personally as a director, and I have inherited and hired staff members who are equally interested in doing good work for the commission and for the council. One of the ways we do that, and it's also, I think, of paramount importance, is that we bring you CEQA documents like EIRs or MNDs that use easy to understand language that the public can easily find and that we're prepared to present and answer questions. That's been a standard for a long time in the world of CEQA document preparation. It's supposed to be written in a way that's understandable to the public. I can't say that every technical study that's embedded in EIR is that understandable. These are written by scientists a lot of the time, but the narrative and the conclusions and the work we bring forward should be really understandable, because that's how we serve that goal of transparency. We're going to follow CEQA procedures. There's a ton of them embedded in the law about when you have to do things, the timing, how long, to whom. And so procedurally, I will always endeavor to be legally compliant with all those very detailed laws. I also I think it's important, it is important to me that we meet the legislative intent. The goal of CEQA is to provide transparency about the environmental effects of development or of policy adoption, or frankly of buying pens. That one is actually exempt from CEQA. But I think that's another goal that's important to me, is that we're meeting that legislative intent. And then I think lastly, to sum it all up, efficient, complete work that provides useful information to decision makers in the community. There's no, in my experience, we don't want to overdo CEQA. That's typically why spend a lot of money doing a lot of things that are not necessary. We want to do what's necessary, and we want to do it well, but efficient is important to me, because CEQA definitely, a lot of projects, that's where they basically die, is in the CEQA process. So I think those are my considerations, and for you all, I made it a shorter list. Again, unless you want to go into document preparation of CEQA stuff, which I don't recommend. I think it's helpful for the commission to understand the difference between the project, that's this set of actions that are coming before you, and the CEQA document, which is how we're disclosing environmental effects. Vitally important that you're reviewing the documents that we send you, and I do encourage you to always look at what we say about the CEQA determination, read it, and if you have questions, call us. It sometimes sounds like we're lawyers writing those sections, because there's a certain amount of structure to that part of our reports, but I would encourage all of you to take responsibility for knowing how this project's getting through CEQA. And then another role you'll play from time to time is holding that public hearing on a draft EIR. That's an optional activity under CEQA. In my professional experience, it's really helpful, because members of the public get to hear what is an EIR and what am I supposed to do and what does it mean. So you all have that role as well. And that concludes my presentation. I do have a bunch of slides if you have more specific questions, but I saved those for questions.
Unless there are any questions, we'll move into item C.
Okay.
Oh, just a second, Wilkerson. Commissioner Wilkerson, pardon me.
Traffic is a part of CEQA, correct?
Yes.
So I can't take more than 2 steps currently in this town without someone asking me about a restaurant that is causing massive traffic issues. So my question is, how was that project completed, and what was the sequel process on that? Just curious, just so the public can understand what went through that.
Thank you, Commissioner Wilkerson. I do not recall, and I'm wondering if Senior Planner Enoch might be able to help me out with what our environmental review path was for that drive-through. Here he comes.
Sorry about that. Senior Planner Arnold here. Yes, that particular restaurant in question, I think the evaluation was a categorical exemption, possibly for reconstruction or replacement of existing structure. As you know, that site, I think, was formerly an Applebee's. So it was a restaurant establishment. And Director Morris mentioned that there are objective standards that we look at in our code to determine whether or not projects that get built can produce certain impacts. If a project complies with those objective standards, it's assumed that it doesn't produce any impacts. If a project needs exemptions from certain standards, then you evaluate whether those exemptions could create potential issues. And the situation or the particular entitlement that was for that new restaurant drive-through facility, staff reviewed it and confirmed that the project would meet those objective standards. And that's what we hold developers to, is to make sure that they are meeting those standards that we set forth. Just because a business is successful doesn't mean we have the ability or the right to change those standards in the middle of the game. There's no justification that the city has for being able to do those types of things. So as long as they meet those standards and we review those and have those responsible departments evaluating those projects to confirm compliance with those objective standards, and it's a good project. Some might say that.
Pardon the interruption. Can you, what standards are you talking about?
Okay, so example of objective standards is the maximum or the minimum number of spaces that are required in a drive-through lane for vehicles to stack in. The city has standards, and drive-through restaurants are required to provide a certain amount of space for vehicles to stack in, one right after another, before the order screen and then before the place where they pick up those their food. And if they provide those minimum spaces for stacking, that is called meeting the standard. If they don't provide enough space in between where the car enters, where the order screen is, and where they pick up their food, then they would not meet the standard. And staff reviews those types of things to determine whether or not, are there alternative designs that could be evaluated? Are there changes that should be done? How can we redesign the project site? That would be an example of an objective standard.
I just want to jump in and say that we cannot design projects to really achieve in some cases, opening day or the opening interest that happens when these new desirable chicken restaurants open up. And we actually make sure with retail is very popular at Christmas time, but we don't park it for Christmas time parking. We have, as a department, gotten feedback about that particular fast food establishment, and we're working on a written response to some comments I think were sent to the commission. So I just wanted to let you know that we will be getting back to this commission with some feedback from our city traffic engineer and planning staff about that establishment. And our city traffic engineer has actually been out there now during peak times to make some observations as part of getting back to our inquirer.
I didn't mean to.
No, it was your question.
Okay. I don't mean to cut you off, but like, was there outreach done to the other local businesses attached to that other strip mall and how the impact that establishment has had on them?
During the development review process, yes, we send out notices to the adjoining businesses, property owners, and existing tenants, notify them. Here's a proposal that's come in. In this particular case, we held an administrative hearing, which is something that we did in Zoom space at the time, I believe. And we offer an opportunity for individuals to come and comment. I don't have the project in front of me. I can't tell you whether or not anybody did have any particular comments about that. But yes, notification was provided.
Okay. My only concern is the direct impact of the other adjacent businesses. And frequently one for my line of work, I'm hearing that one may close down. So that's a direct impact to me, that business is being suffered because this business is successful or not successful, but it's getting a lot of traffic, but we may not have taken into consideration, or they may not have showed up for the hearing or whatever, right? And the impact that's gonna have on closing a business, closing jobs here in town. That's just, that makes me scratch my head a little bit, that probably, Zoom land and all that stuff, but just moving forward on those types of issues, just double down, I guess, and do as much as we can, because there is a direct impact of, there's gonna be a business closing in that strip mall. And that bothers me, because those are jobs, right, people who work and live here in Vacaville. So.
Thank you, Commissioner Wilkerson. Commissioner Labonte?
Two things. Wondering if there's any precedent for looking back historically when one of these chains have opened in another city to see if there's been any issues like we're experiencing now. And then secondly, do our standards account for two very popular side-by-side drive-through restaurants entering through the same space?
Commissioner,
Hypothetical restaurants.
those are great questions. Because this is a CEQA training and not a noticed item to talk about a certain chicken restaurant, I think that what I'd like to do.
We're talking hypotheticals, right?
Yes, it is quite hypothetical. I'm going to be asking my staff to respond to those questions in the response we're working on, both to the member of the public that sent the email to the commission as well as to the commission. We'll get back to you on that.
And I just want to thank Commissioner Wilkerson for that question. This kind of gets at a subject that a number of us have had, and I think the key that you reference is people in the street. People are asking, people are talking about problems that they're having in their lives, and I think we need to be able to understand the impacts of our decisions. These objective standards, I think I'd like to learn more about those, because a lot of us have questions about how they're developed, can they be reviewed, and I think that as we get real-time feedback, it'd be great to give the publicly air. We like these standards. Do we want the best standard that Vacaville, the Vacaville that we want? Are these the kind of restaurants that we want near schools sometimes? So I'd like to, for our next, if anyone agrees, it'd be great to learn more about these standards for our next training.
We will work on developing that.
Thank you. Aaron, to clear a room, I guess. I mean, you just...
This is the gift of CEQA.
Yeah, I don't know if you have that. I have that effect when I do my questioning. So, thank you very much for that training. We will now turn to SB 330 training with our favorite trainer, Commissioner Morris.
So if that last one did not clear the room, we'll see what happens with this one. This training is, I'll explain a little while why it's here this evening, but really this is about SB 330, which is called the Housing Accountability Act. At the beginning of this training, I'm going to give you the background on why the state of California stated that it has implemented this law, and I'm going to talk about what the law requires and how it affects our planning review process here in Vacaville. So bear with me. The first few slides are very text heavy. I promise I'm not going to read all the words to you because there's a lot of them. So when the state of California adopted the Housing Accountability Act originally in 2019, and then amended it in 2021, and really put into place through the year 2030, they cited that the lack of housing in California is a critical problem that threatens our quality of life. They stated the obvious, that we have the most expensive housing in the nation, and that the consequences of not having enough housing for everyone, resulting consequences can be discrimination against low-income folks, a lack of housing to support employment growth. You all talked about that or heard about that this evening with our biotech, and then trying to have housing that aligns with that. An imbalance in jobs and housing, you know, where people have to go elsewhere to work because they can't afford to live where they work, or vice versa. Urban sprawl, some places have lots and lots of housing and still don't have the jobs that create that balance. Excessive commuting, and then obviously the air quality stuff that goes along with excessive commuting. And really, the state made the case, and these slides do go on, I promise again, I won't read all of it, that there are economic, environmental, and social costs in governmental decision-making that disproves housing development, or drags it out, or otherwise really tries to stop housing development. And so that's where the Housing Accountability Act comes in and puts some parameters on our review. And I'm gonna actually, this slide just talks about how we've got a backlog of 2 million units in the state of California, and that we could catch up if we built at least 180,000 new units a year, and we are nowhere, I mean, I can't remember where we're at, we're nowhere near dealing with this backlog. We have the 49th out of 50 state lowest home ownership rate, which is pretty incredible, and also only 1/2 of our households are able to afford the cost of housing. That term is defined, we'll talk about that with the housing element, it's how much of your income you have to spend to have a roof over your head. And the state does not think it's affordable if you're spending most of your income to have a roof over your head. Again, we have more. The state went quite lengthy on all these explanations. We have a lot of renters that are paying a lot more than 30% of their income toward rent. The state found that basically if you have adequate housing, safe and affordable housing, people have more money for high quality food, for their health care, their kids do better in school, that literally says that in the preamble to this law, and that businesses have an easier time finding employees. And then also the state cites the issues with greenhouse gas emissions when people have to travel a long way to their work. So this takes us to the what. What the Housing Accountability Act does is it actually steps in and it limits not just the city of Vacaville, but all agencies in California. It limits our ability to deny qualifying housing development projects. It also prevents us from lowering the density, like saying, oh, I like this 300 unit project. If you take 100 units off, we're good. That's another thing this law will not allow us to do anymore. And it requires that projects that are subject to this law be evaluated against strictly objective standards and regulations. So does it meet the general plan land use, the designation? Does it meet the density? Does it meet the setbacks, height, parking requirements, all those basically fixed and objective standards. And then interestingly, I'm gonna actually go to the next slide because this breaks it down. The definition of housing development projects is so broad that it pretty much encompasses every residential project you could ever build, except for maybe if someone was building just one house. So the state defines housing development projects as a land use consisting of residential units only, mixed use developments consisting of residential and non-residential uses with at least 2/3 of the square footage designated for residential uses, and transitional and supportive housing. So these are the kind of projects that are subject to SB 330. And we're going to talk about how developers elect to have their project viewed through this law. And this is virtually everything that's residential in nature in our city, and this is true statewide. And so before I embark on the next slide, I want to acknowledge this is new to Vacaville. At the end, I'll conclude with how many projects we've received so far. But I want to tell you this training is timely because these projects are coming, and they're coming your way soon. And I wanted to make sure you all understand the parameters that the state has given us. So again, I think we're trying to make this point. If a housing development project complies with the objective design standards and regulations, it has to be approved. That's the bottom line with this Housing Accountability Act. And it's not okay to reduce the density. If there was a case where a city did not want to approve a housing development project that's subject to SB 330, or said, oh, we like this, but take a couple floors off and then we're good. In order to do that, the city would have to identify a specific adverse impact on the public health or safety that could only be addressed by denying the housing project or modifying it. And with all the languages on the presentation screen, it gets complicated and legalistic, but basically the state has set a very high bar if someone was trying to deny an SB 330 housing project. And it goes back to the purpose of this law, but I'm gonna we'll keep moving forward. So, oh, sure.
Would traffic fall under, is there an argument for health and safety?
I have a feeling that argument will get made in different things, but if a project is consistent with the general plan land use designation, the traffic impacts of that general plan build out would have been considered in the general plan EIR. So just generating more traffic would definitely not be a basis for a public health and safety kind of issue.
It'd have to be in combination with some unusual characteristic that poses a threat to the public health, welfare, or safety.
Yeah, and I don't know what that would be exactly, because I can't really think of a good example. Because I'm thinking if you have a general plan land use diagram, let's say someone wanted to put housing next to an asphalt batching plant, well, generally your general plan would not allow for that. So I'm still kind of, I was trying to find examples of, but I can't so far find any. Still a relatively new law. California litigation takes sometimes years to churn through. So at this point though, I'm going to talk about the process that we use to.
Maybe a Superfund site.
Yes.
Would be a unique use that would pose health, safety risks to like a school.
Yeah, no, that could be a good example. Yeah, it's unusual. There aren't a lot of those. They're all identified. Yeah. There are a lot, but there aren't infinite amounts of those. So here at the city, we really got very aware of SB 330 when we got our first preliminary application that was filed under SB 330. So when this law was adopted by the state, the Department of Housing and Community Development came up with guidance on what constitutes a preliminary application. And so when we received our first one, we were like, oh, this is that new law, and we've been working through that ever since. So under the law, when the developer files their preliminary applications, they lock in all of those existing development standards and regulation at the time that they submit the preliminary application for a period of 180 days. And I don't totally know what the legislature intended, but I have a feeling it was, if someone files a preliminary application, you can't go out and change all the rules to stymie their project. You know, you have to actually, everything gets locked in. So within the 180 days, the developer has the right to come in with their formal development application, which is now subject to those lockdown standards that were in effect at the time of their preliminary review. And then their application gets reviewed for completeness based on a state checklist. The state's like, these are the things developers have to submit for SB 330. So we can't say, oh, but we want 15 more things. It's nice because the two checklists are not dissimilar, but the state has said cities don't add weird local things that you throw into the mix. You have to stick with what we've determined is adequate. Once the development application is in, city staff's role is to really, within a fairly compressed time frame, which we'll talk about in a moment, review the project for consistency with the general plan. There's a specific plan, the zoning regulations, all those fixed regulations. And we do that within the 30-day time period to do a completeness determination. So I have a slide again that breaks this down, but really once an application is deemed complete, under this other law that we implement all the time called the Permit Streamlining Act, we have quite a bit of time to get it to its first public hearing. Under this Housing Accountability Act, our time frame is greatly limited over the normal. It's very much a compressed time period. So the idea is this thing comes in, this project, once it's complete, you really are looking to get it set for that, that public hearing because we're constrained in how much time we can spend deliberating on it. The other thing that's important to note is that the state has said there could be no more than 5 public hearings or meetings for these projects. So, in a community meeting counts. So if you, let's say you do a community meeting, maybe you do 2, go to planning commission, the planning commission is like, oh, we're gonna continue this because we need to think about it more. That's meeting number 4. Maybe they make a decision, it goes to council, that's meeting number 5. Now the council has run out of meetings in order to stay in strict compliance with SB 330. So we were aware of that and we're judicious in the amount of community meetings we're gonna do for these projects, but we're going to do community meetings. It's important to get out there and have the public understand, you know, these projects.
Okay, can that be waived by the developer? Because that's just a generous gesture. Is that okay?
I'm sure that a developer could do that, but it hasn't happened yet. So, because these are these projects that are trying to happen under this law to make housing happen. But yeah, that could happen. And then I make this point again that the city's discretionary review is limited. It's not like, oh, we got this project and we're thinking about this other thing. And it's limited to those laws and regulations that were in effect at the time of that preliminary review application. And these are objective fixed standards. This chart, I had so much text in this presentation and the senior planner that's here this evening helped me out with a chart. So I appreciate that. So the project comes in at the preliminary submittal stage. That's the 180 days to submit. It comes in as a project. Formal project submittal, we have 30 days to deem the project complete. And if it's incomplete, meaning there's things missing from the checklist, the clock stops. The developer goes to get those things that are missing from the completeness. once a project's deemed complete, if it's like a housing project that's implementing a previously approved specific plan or area plan, and there was an EIR that was done, we get a little bit of time to decide, well, we would apply the EIR, but we have 90 days to get the project to its final decision if it's a residential only project. If it's, and so that's 90 days from the environmental determination, which comes right around that time of that completeness review. So 90 plus 30 takes us back to the application submittal date.
Penalties?
Litigation, having our local decision-making authority taken away from us, that kind of thing.
And the state fine? Liable for fines?
We can get legal consequences and look at Andrea. I'm not sure how this is playing out across the state of California right now because it's still a relatively new law, but.
I thought I had read or heard a daily.
I'm not sure, I would have to look into a daily fine, but I know that HCD is monitoring all of these things as well, and just based on the statutory scheme for other laws that they monitor, that's a possibility that there could be.
Are there examples of violations yet? that we know
Well,
of?
I think our biggest liability and the biggest consideration for the commission is related to the legal remedies that the applicant would have if we don't follow this process. So, and, you know, usually that comes down to attorney's fees, and that gets really, really expensive for the city.
Not unlike CEQA in that it creates, you know, a regime that's executed by the players. So they have these rights, but there's, you know, HCD enforces it, but if there's not a developer that complains, or if they're not waiving, if they waive, that's an important thing.
And my understanding is that the litigation could be brought to the city by anybody that would be a perpetual or resident of a residential development.
Yes.
Anybody that may have had
So
an
it-
opportunity to live there could actually bring.
Yes.
Okay.
So I've just decoded this chart. If there is an EIR that we're relying on, let's say we have a year to complete a new EIR, or we already have an EIR. Under normal permit streamlining, the city would have 180 days to make a decision. For a non-deed restricted, just market rate residential project or mixed use project with that residential component, we'd have 90 days from the completeness determination. And if this was a deed restricted affordable project where 49% of the units were deed restricted to be affordable, you know, over 55 years, which is considered perpetuity, we would have 60 days from the complete application to get it to its final decision. You all don't need to memorize these things. We're going to bring these things before you in compliance with the law, but I need to make the point that staff is implementing a new law that really requires that we move these projects along. And so you may see projects earlier than you normally would, given that we used to have 180 days to get them to final decision, because we are working on this new heightened timeline. For projects that come in, and this is a different path for them, different environmental clearance path. From our last training, deemed complete, they're exempt. We have 60 days from the completeness determination with no exceptions for whatever type of project. And if the project came in and needed an MND, we have actually quite a bit of time to complete that. And once it's complete, we have the 60 days. So this is all different than our normal processing timeframes. That's the point of this chart. So at present, our department has 3 SB 330 applications under review. And these projects are not the subject of tonight's training. So I don't want to get into talking about them because you'll see one of them next month and you'll see the others not that long from now, once they're complete and ready to go. These projects will follow different entitlement paths. So, because there's some housing projects in Vacaville can be approved at the staff level, like some of our downtown specific plan projects. I kind of wish we had some of those under this, but we don't right now, so we're not doing that. Some of them go to commission for final review. Those decisions are appealable to council, and that will count as another meeting, and that sort of counts against our time clock. And then there are projects that we know for sure have to go to council because they involve a legislative action. So that's the other scenario. So part of staff's work planning on these projects is looking at the deadline for getting the final decision and kind of working backward on how we need to move to make sure these projects stay on the timeline. And then the next step for us, and this is true for everything, but especially with SB 330, it was adopted in 2019. It was already amended in 2021 to push it out 5 more years. Each and every year, the state keeps adopting new housing laws. So as one of the things your professional staff do, we are obviously monitoring that with help from the city attorney's office. And we will be bringing as needed code revisions, even though we just adopted our new code, to make sure that we stay in compliance with state law. And then in parallel with that, we're always looking at the procedures we have to put in place to comply with these requirements. So that was only 11 of the slides, but that was a lot. I am very happy to answer any questions you have.
So 2019 was the, anything before that does not fall under, rules that, those go back to the rules previously, correct?
Yes. I have to feel compelled to say, though, if a developer had a project on file before this new law went into effect, they could actually file their application, a similar one, under SB 330 to shorten the timeframes and to make it move faster. For some reason, it wasn't moving as fast enough to satisfy their interest.
And you said total of 5 public comment, 5 public meetings.
Which are a combination of public hearings,
Right.
continued public hearings, community meetings, and whenever we get to that final decision within those specified timeframes.
Yeah, I'm not.
I don't believe they invoked SB 330. They did not file the preliminary application under SB 330. I think it's because they started ahead of that 2019 date. That's more like the grandfather of this one, because the state put density bonus law into place even like 15, 20 years ago, and they just keep making it more and more flexible, trying to help make more and more housing happen. But yes, grandfather, not cousin.
Currently have?
We're currently very understaffed in the planning division, although we've just hired somebody and we have another person we hope to hire, and I've just brought my new assistant director on board, so we're trying to staff up. Yeah, these things actually, there's more pressure because of the time frame and the number of hearings, but it actually forces the city staff as a whole team across all the departments to actually be more efficient, which is probably part of what the state hoped, because it's not like you have time, oh, it's deemed complete, now I'm gonna put in the queue with all the other things I'm working on. You have to prioritize these projects and get them ready to go to hearing and write the necessary staff report and do the necessary environmental reviews. So we haven't had serious challenges yet, but we don't know how many more projects will come in, under this law requiring this expedited processing.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like this law is so new that there are maybe some inherent vulnerabilities with the demands that this puts on local authorities. Because, like in a worst case scenario, suppose you get bombarded with tons of these applications coming in, and you have a minimal staff because of a pandemic or some weird situation going on. That you're recovering from, maybe economic, or if you're out in New York, maybe there's a nuclear blast, I don't know, based on the PSA. But something happens where you don't have the ability. So then what? Do these approvals just, it's like a suicide pact, whether you like it or not, this is gonna happen?
I'm not sure how much that's a rhetorical question, how much that's but we're
I'm
gonna.
just curious, where's the limit to where the state can, where a developer can, where cities at the breaking point, like say, I know that Vacaville has a small staff right now. And if you're getting bombarded with requests, so how does a local government without staff respond to the state mandate?
Well, I still have some staff, but one of the things about these laws, and they actually will say this sometimes in the plain language, is that this is an unfunded mandate. Like the state says, you're gonna do this, we're not giving you money to do this, and they're really blatant about it because that used to be the local government response. This is an unfunded mandate, we can't do this, so.
It's in the Constitution.
So.
Unfunded mandates are in the state Constitution,
So
you can't do it.
we in our professional organizations, we were always like, this is another unfunded mandate, but the fact is this is a mandate, and at this point, it's still early days with this new law, but we're endeavoring to meet it. And part of it's because really the intent of this law is to facilitate housing production, and that is, we're a city that just did a housing strategy that you all will be receiving a presentation on. We're working on our housing element, so it's not like we're not interested in facilitating housing. This law, though, does take our current, maybe more leisurely process and really compresses it. And it will put you as a commission in that position of seeing projects closer to when they were first filed than you would have in the past.
Are there other questions for Director Morris? Thank you very much for the presentation. It was excellent. We will now move to the next phase of our agenda. Status report on development and major projects, item 9. We'll start with the building division. Director Morris, the floor is yours once again.
Thank you.
I tried to filibuster there for you to get to your seat.
It's okay. So the building division has had, seriously, yet another busy month. This year, 30 new this month, 30 new single-family homes were cleared for occupancy, so new homeowner can move on in. 40 single-family home permits were issued, so that's specifically residential development. 40 new building permits went out the door. We had completed 1,413 inspections, again, with our 2 to 3 inspectors, depending on the week. 556 building permits were issued. So that includes those 40 residential permits and a bunch of other permits. It's been really busy, especially with like personal home stuff, in addition to industrial. And then we issued 120 solar permits. And I am excited to announce, which I will do at the end, but I'm actually gonna do it now. I've actually hired a chief building official, and I'm not at liberty to disclose her name, but she will be starting in August. And I am delighted that she will be doing this building division report some of the time.
When we get that report, is there a way to differentiate or pull out what are ADU permits
Yeah, actually there is.
from those that we could get that information?
Yeah, of course, I can do that going forward. That's actually easy to do.
Perfect, thank you.
Cool, thank you.
Would it also be possible to get a list of CEQA actions that have occurred since the last meeting? Under whether they're exemptions or, because what I'd like to not be surprised about is when there's like a project such as, you know, like if you have a hypothetical burger restaurant next to maybe a hypothetical brand new chicken restaurant, and there's a exemption that's filed. I'd love to know about that exemption when it's filed.
We do that actually under the current planning report. We talk about our activity, knowing about the specific interest generating from this hypothetical chicken restaurant. I'll work with our planning team to see what we can do.
I just would love to just see like a summary graph that would, or just, you could just, you know, include in the agenda just the actual items, so we can see with our own eyes what an exemption looks like, how it flowed in a specific case, and the like. Thank you. Commissioner Vargas?
Yeah, I was curious on the solar panel permit request. Is that coming from a certain area, concentrated area, a certain district where, I think you said there was 120?
Yeah, I think, and I could be incorrect, but I think I'm actually correct. These are mostly homeowner installs of solar permits. That's been really popular. We have, getting calls from solar companies that have various questions or issues about our process. But yes, we have a streamlined process for these permits, and they've been very popular in the last few years in Vacaville.
Those requests just coming from all over Vacaville?
Yeah, they're dispersed in existing homes. New homes also are required to have solar, so they will have solar. But we actually do get a lot of them from existing homes where people are adding that to try to reduce those PG&E bills.
Thank you. Does the city permit these individuals? I'm sorry. Because sometimes like they show up at your door and they say, the city of Vacaville has given me a permit to sell solar on your doorstep.
They may have I don't know if we have a peddler's permit. That sounds like they're talking about a peddler's permit. If someone wants to build solar, they come into the building division to get a permit from the building division. It's a very streamlined process, and it really culminates in an inspector going out to make sure it was installed correctly.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, that's, the solar people are everywhere, so.
Yes, they are.
Current planning.
This will be presented by Albert.
June was a busy month. We received quite a bit of projects. I'll start off in District 1, Valley Strong Credit Union. That's a new design review and tentative parcel map. And that's a financial bank that'll be about 1,500 square feet with an 830 square foot drive-up canopy for deposits. Where that's being proposed is a 1.64 acre site next to the Denny's off of Nut Tree Road, where Lowe's is. There's a vacant lot over there, a couple of lots, and they'll be looking at constructing that there. That's currently in the review process. In District 2, it was a very small remodel over at the Fairfield Inn. That was approved. It was a modification request to change the exterior elevations for that one. So now that they've been approved for that one, they'll likely move forward with building permits, and you'll see some exterior changes to that inn. In District 3, the Hampton Inn and Suites was approved last month. We also processed the Refuge project, which was a design review request to establish a membership organization or a church within an existing building at 180 East Monte Vista Avenue. That's a building that's large enough for multiple tenants, so the church would occupy approximately 3,500 square feet worth of that existing building. So you'll see them starting to operate at that location. A more notable project that occurred in District 3 was the approval of 700 Park on Main. That's that major modification request where they originally had East Main District, and that was a mixed-use development, and so we had a different builder come in to modify that proposal for 81 units. That's going to be a mixed use of residential and commercial in the downtown area. A couple of new projects that we received in District 5 was the Palms. And this is off of Butcher Road. If you know where Guns Fishing and other stuff is, there's a vacant lot right across the street, adjoining Christian Community, or no, Crossroads Community Church. And this is a new proposal with a conditional use permit, design review, and tentative map for 22 units. It's multifamily development, duplexes, I believe. And that one is likely one that will require planning commission review. We also received a smaller 1,800 square foot proposal to construct a prefabricated metal building on a piece of property at 902 Davis Street. Currently, I think that there is A to Z landscaping that's operating out of that location, and so they're looking at putting in a metal building right behind that existing smaller house. And then one of the last notable projects that I wanted to bring to the Commission's attention is we received a new application for Park Parish. That's a general plan amendment, zoning map amendment, a very large land use entitlements. And it's for a 2-acre site that's located across the street from Magnolia Park over in Southtown Phase 3. And what the developer is looking at doing is changing the neighborhood commercial zoning for that lot to residential medium. And the main purpose for that is they'd like to construct 21 lots for single-family homes, detached. So that one's another one that would be brought forward to the commission at some future date. We're still reviewing that project and eventually would end up in front of City Council. That's it for the current planning update.
You, Planner Enol.
Director Morris? I have the advanced planning update. Work continues on the housing element and the safety element and the environmental justice element. The housing element is going to be released as a public draft likely in September, maybe in August. We're working on it right now, and we will be scheduling an item here at Planning Commission during the public review period. Both your comments and any feedback you want to give the council, because they will need to review that same public draft housing element and recommend on hopefully its submittal to the state of California to begin that higher level review process. The safety element, we just started work on that, so we should have more on that topic soon. It follows the city's adoption of the local hazard mitigation plan, which is good because that's a county-wide multi-jurisdictional plan. But we'll be following up with updating our local general plan section as it relates to safety. And then on the environmental justice element, we held a community workshop and it wasn't particularly well attended. So we're actually reaching out to each and every person we invited to that workshop to see if they want to meet with us, talk with us on the phone, view the video and give us feedback, because we really are eager for feedback on that. This commission will receive a presentation on the environmental justice element, which is really turned into more of a community health element. And that will be in the next couple of months, so be ready for that. We took the Urban Reserve Development Inventory and Land Need Forecast to the council last month. And after a very truncated presentation, there was robust council discussion. They ultimately accepted staff's recommendation and directed us to do three things. One of them that involves this commission. We're going to take the report that we drafted that looks at our available residential land and whether we have sufficient land to achieve the housing we need over the next 20 years. And we're gonna be vetting it with members of the development community and in a separate effort, reaching out to every property owner that owns land in what we call our urban reserve to talk to them directly and get their feedback. We're then gonna make any changes to that report and bring it back to Planning Commission for your comments and for public comments. And that will be part of this, report's road back to the council. So they can decide whether it's time to unlock the urban reserve, and if so, how much land we need to unlock. So more on that. That's gonna come back with a full staff report. And then otherwise, we really are working on downtown specific plan implementation. The lights are brighter downtown as a result of one of the first projects. And I have a video that I do not prepare to show this evening that shows how incredible the difference is between pre and post conditions. And frankly, the city team that's implementing this with the council support, we're just getting started. We have a lot of downtown specific plan improvements that are coming over the next 3 months and 6 months. It should make it even better downtown. And that's a month.
Thank you, Director Morris. Any questions? Director Morris.
This is great.
Item 10. See, this is what I'm saying about the 3:30 thing. You know, we have one person doing all these jobs, so.
Feels a little bit like an episode of Scooby-Doo, but that's okay. So I just talked about the urban reserve, so I'm not gonna talk about that again. The council talked about that. We got our direction. The council is scheduled to receive an update / presentation on the Northeast growth area that is now slated for August 9th. This is the 1,400 acre part of Vacaville identified in our general plan as our future technology park. And so we're bringing an informational session, it's me and the economic development director, an informational session with the council to talk about the area and the planning that's needed. We have a developer that wants to be part of it, and so we're really excited about that. The council's also that'll be of interest to this commission for sure. And then the council has not yet taken action on the Corby battery storage because it got continued to the August 23rd meeting. So I'll have an outcome on that one after I see you next. And shall I just roll into item B, tentative schedule? Okay, so in August, we have quite a stack up of things that might be coming your way. So the Southtown Apartments is the first SB 330 project that this commission will be reviewing. That's part of why we did the study session tonight, so you have the background. And then next month, you'll be reviewing at a public hearing the Southtown Apartments project. We have North Village AP2 and Green Tree, both very large projects scheduled for August 16th. I'm not sure they're both going to make it. There's different factors for each of them. I do try to bring you balanced agendas, not the two biggest projects in the city's recent history on the same evening, but more as we get through agenda management and some of the other logistical things.
Maybe throw Lagoon Valley in somehow.
Yeah, just to throw in a little more. And then on announcements, some of you at the beginning of the meeting or after the meeting, I have hired an assistant director of community development, Joshua Montmayor, and he's here this evening. And if you haven't met him yet, he's up there. He joins us from the city of Pacifica. I could not be more thrilled with his unique background of supporting a city manager, doing a huge variety of work, not just planning, and then also his really good planning experience and understanding of community development departments. So this is week 3. Please say nice things because I'm really excited to have him on board. It took me more than half a year to find someone and to hire someone that I really feel excited about for this role. So welcome, Josh. And then I mentioned earlier, I have offered to, and we're in background on a chief building official. Just without getting too personal, this person lives in Solano County and is very excited that this opportunity came up. I believe she will be starting in August. And I haven't had a CBO since December, so I am thrilled. And then lastly, on the planning side, Albert has been managing a couple vacant positions, some college interns, and a couple very determined staff who are not quitters, but we have actually offered and gotten acceptance from a assistant planner who comes from our city internship program. So it's a known quantity. He is a Solano County native. He wants to work in our city, and he could not have been more convincing. So we look forward to introducing him at an upcoming planning commission meeting. And then we have a second open position, kind of entry-level position that we believe we found the right person for. So I'm hoping to get to introduce a couple new staff members to y'all in the near term. Things are looking up. That's all I had.
Welcome to Vacaville. I'm gonna let that one sit. Learn my lesson. Okay. The moment we've all been waiting for. We'll now turn to commissioner comments. Commissioner Vargas.
I have none. No comments. Yeah, there was a comment there.
I have comments. On the record, welcome, Josh. I'm just kidding. Welcome, Josh. You hopefully stay. Vacaville is a great place to work. And after our next meeting, I think it's back to school, right? So everyone, for the next couple of weeks, and school starts up, and so does that lovely traffic that accompanies that. Yeah. You know how it is. I'm learning.
Congratulations to Director Morris, has been featured in a local, not local, but and she's received a major award, and now she's reporting documentaries, and I hope we don't end up losing her. But congratulations on the acknowledgement of your excellent career. Anything to tell us about it?
I will be quick because it's getting late for all of us. I am the recipient of the Greenbelt Alliance's Hidden Heroes of the Greenbelt Award, and this is based on my now a 22-year career helping not make happen exactly, but facilitate infill housing. It's really been a passion of my career, particularly deed restricted affordable, but I've worked on, I think, every kind of housing up to the mid-rise. So I'm excited, and they are coming here to Vacaville this Friday to both film what they call B-roll of parts of Vacaville that I'm pointing them to, some of our project areas, our beautiful downtown, our neighborhoods. And then they're actually going to come with me back to my current headquarters in Napa to film some projects that are actually up and running there as part of this 7-minute film that they're making. So it's not really a documentary, it's more like a vignette, but thank you very much, Chair Klein. I'm very excited.
It will be one. I mean, one day you'll be cutting documentaries and sure. Yeah, cans. This is just the start of something special.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, with that, we're adjourned. Thank you very much. Good evening, Vacaville.